Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we're going to be working on crosscut saws. You have here a one-man and a two-man saw, and we're going to go into detail on how to sharpen them and have a little bit of fun. What can they do? Let's dive in. Now before we actually dive into this, there is an entire cult out there devoted to sharpening and restoring antique crosscut saws and new ones. And they are very useful still in that there are a lot of uses for them in clearing trails and things like that in parks. And so because of that, I have to warn you, this video will not be about the best way to sharpen a saw perfectly and with all precision. If you want to see that information, I'm going to leave a link to a series of videos down below that go into great detail on every little bit you can do. I want to take these saws from okay to functioning saws. I want to be able to take them out on the trail, cut down a tree, have a little bit of fun with them. They're not going to be perfect, they're not going to be perfectionistic, but they're going to cut, and they're going to cut rather well. So first, let's actually dive into a little bit of the difference between these two and what you're looking for in a saw. There are more patterns of saw types out there than you can shake a stick at, but these are the two most common. You're going to see this a lot on your one-man saw. This is a fairly common one that you have a cutter and then a small raker and then two cutters and then a small raker and two cutters and a small raker, and the two cutters are actually close together. This one is fairly common for your two-man saws to have four cutters and then a large raker, and you see these massive gullets beside the raker because the raker is what removes the chips out. So you want to have a lot of space here beside the raker so that it has a place for all the chips to go before it gets ejected out the side of the log. So before we go into detail on sharpening it, I want to explain exactly what the saw does. Now this is a regular crosscut saw, hand saw, and it's set up so that there are just a bunch of points here. And each one of these are a knife blade. Half of them are a knife blade on this side and half of them are a knife blade on the other side of the saw. And what they're basically going to do is they're going to cut two parallel lines so close together side by side that they remove the material. And those knives are actually cutting through the fibers because all the fibers are sticking through this way. The knife slices across them as opposed to chipping them out with a chisel. Now with a big crosscut like this, you have to think about it more as a plow plane than you would have as a regular crosscut saw, because you do still have these points that will slice two lines parallel to each other. But then you also have these rakers that are kind of like a chisel that will come in and remove the waste in between. So every time this blade goes across, this tip and this tip are going to cut one line over here, and then this tip and this tip are going to cut a parallel line right beside it, but a little ways away. And then the raker is going to come through the chisel and chip out all those pieces in between, basically turning it into a dado cut all the way across. So you can basically imagine it as a saw cutting one side of the groove, and then the saw going over and cutting the other side of the groove, and then a chisel coming through and removing in between. So that raker is basically the chisel that will remove the chips in between the two saw cuts. So before I go much farther, I want to take off the handles on this. It just makes it easier to sharpen. And I'm not going to spend much time cleaning this plate. It's really in pretty decent shape. Yes, I could come through and clean off all the surface rust, but this patina will actually protect it nicely. I'm going to just make sure that there's no buildup on the surface, and everything on this one is pretty good. So the next thing I want to do is actually come through and joint all the teeth. I want the tip of all of these points to be exactly the same height. And so if one of them is sticking up too high or down too low, I want to bring them all down the same level. So basically what I'm going to do is grab a file and I'm going to run all the way down them. Now on my normal hand saws, I'm just going to hold the file and I'll run down and I'll pinch the blade on either side. But with this one, I'm going to run the risk of slicing my hand up. So they actually make these tools that are for sharpening these large crosscuts, and most of them actually have a way of holding the file on there so that this will slide against the plate, and you can run this down the teeth and hit all of them. So we're going to start at one end and go all the way to the other, making sure they're all the same height. And there are actually saw filing jigs that are much longer and they have a sled on either end that will go over the tips much easier, but not everyone has that, so you can just pick up a simple one like this at most of the tool meets and go to town. You can see here that these three have shiny spots on them, but then I come over to this one and the tip of this one is not shiny. So that means I need to take these all down a little bit more until I get that one shiny. Now you can see here I'm actually missing a tooth where this one is broken off. If you're missing one or two teeth from a saw, oh well, not a huge problem. If you're missing half the teeth, problem. But in this case, I'm just going to live with missing this one tooth. Oh well. So here you can see I've hit this tip, and I've just taken the tip off them. But then we come over here to the raker, and you can see how I'm hitting the tip here. You want the rakers to be lower than the tip of your teeth, and so the last time this was filed, this raker was up way too high, and you can see how I'm actually running into it. We're going to be taking care of that in a little bit here. Usually you're not going to be doing a large crosscut saw in this in a regular saw filing vise. You have an entire bench that's designed to hold this in place so that the ends of these don't wobble. So in this case, I'm going to be reserved to working on one section at a time. Except for jointing, we're going to do that all together, even though the ends are a little floppy. Okay, so now we've jointed this all down, and we have a shiny spot on the tip of every tooth. We're making sure that if the rakers are up too high, we're hitting those, and we're bringing everything down into a nice even patch. Now at this point, some people are going to talk about different things. Some people say you should file all the points first. Some people say file the rakers first. I tend to be in a rakers first pattern because I like to keep my points as sharp as possible, so I do those the very last thing. But now that I have a height developed all the way across, I can then adjust the rakers to be the appropriate height. Some saw filing jigs have a device in the back so that you can set these to be ever so slightly taller than you want them to be. So you can file the tips and prongs down to be about 9/1000ths of an inch below the points of your saw. But in this case, none of mine actually have that pointing, so I'm actually just going to be using the Raker filing plate, which is this open mouth here. You can flip it around, and this rests on the points on the other side, and the Raker sticks up just a little bit above this. This particular one is set up so this plate is about 12/1000ths of an inch below the tips of the points on here. So I can file down the Raker to that. But before we do that, I want to shape this Raker a little bit. You can see how right now these sides are pretty flat. I actually want to bend them over a little bit so that it ends up being more of a chisel shape, so that the chisel is shaping more like that. Because remember, we want these to come through and clean out all the chips that have been created by all the points. So the first thing we want to do here is actually shape this Raker, and we want to actually cause this to curl a little bit more. I'm going to clean off a little bit of the material. Right now, it's so thick up here that I'm not going to be able to bend that. So I actually want to cut this gullet down a little bit deeper before we actually start working on the tips here. Now that I've taken this gullet down a little ways, I'm going to rotate the file and kind of round it out. I just want to thin out this Raker a little bit more so it'll bend. There, now you can see how it has a much better sweep to either side in comparison to some of the older ones. So now we want to actually hammer these forward to create a bit of a hook so it bends that way. They do make specialized hammers for this, but for in this case, I'm just going to grab a regular hammer. I'm going to choke up on it and grab it right below the head here and just tap this over. And I'm actually trying to hit it forward like that as opposed to driving it straight down on. Just bend it at an angle. Do the same thing on this side. You can see how that's now creating a bit of a hook so that these are pushing out that way. Next, we're going to get our file guide and bring everything down to the same level as this, and that is going to be about 12/1000ths of an inch below our points. So we can bring this in and file those down until it slides across without hitting it. There we go. So here you can see how there's a flat spot on the top of each of these. I want to leave it so it comes to a very sharp point right here at the tip, and we want to remove that shiny spot. So what I'm going to do is grab my regular mill file here. I'm just going to do a couple strokes until that flat spot disappears. One more, maybe two more. And there we go. That flat spot just disappeared right on there. You can just see a little whisper that's basically just the burr hanging on. Do the same thing on the other side, and that Raker will be ready to go. So for the points, we're basically going to do the same thing we did on the Raker, is I want to file down the edges here until that tip just disappears. So I'm going to hold the file on the back here and go up until that flat spot right on the tip disappears. I'm going to do half of it on one side and then the other half from the other side. And now I have this really nice knife point, I can just remove the burr on the back. And a little bit more, there's just a hair of a tip on that one. Okay, so we're going to work on this tip right here. I'm going to use the file. I'm going to remove a little ways. I'm going to back up, and I want to make sure I'm going at the right angle. I'm just watching that shiny tip. I'm just watching that shiny tip, and I want to go until half of it disappears on this side. And then we'll roll over and do this side. A little bit more on this side. And I'm just watching that shiny tip. And there's just a hair left on that one. I don't know if you can see in the video, but I'm just going until a stroke when that tip disappears. And there it goes. Now we have a really nice sharp edge here. This is a knife blade that will slice one side. Now you can see this next one over here, I'm actually missing the tip on it. And that's going to cause a bit of an issue because, I don't know, I don't have a tooth that works. I'm still going to sharpen the other side of this. I'm just not going to bring it up to a point. I'm just going to take off a little bit of material so that sometime in the future when I sharpen this and I joint everything down and I start nicking this, then I know that I can sharpen this one all the way back to whatever the rest of the teeth come back to sometime in the future. So after hitting all the teeth on one side, then I'm going to turn the saw around and I'll hit all the other teeth that are pointing the other direction. That way I'm always using the saw on my side. I'm not trying to bend over and use it on the other side. I just want to work on the teeth that I can see until I get a nice clean work. Eventually you'll get into a rhythm and you'll march right along this thing and you'll run out of teeth and be like, oh, stink, I'm out of teeth. I gotta stop. It's just a fun meditative thing to do. So here I have the one-man saw, and it's basically going to be the exact same thing once you understand the basics of what the rakers are and what the points are and how you do it. I just want to go through a few little differences on here that might confuse people. First, let's take a look at the Raker filing tool. Now when picking the tool, you want to make sure that it fits your saw. This is the one I have for my two-man saw, and with that one it'll spread across 4 of the points and then put one raker in between. But when I put this one on here, you can see that there are points that reach up in here and I can't get it to balance because it's actually grabbing these points. I don't want it to be grabbing these points, I just want it having the raker sticking up. So for that I have this one, which is a little bit different. Now this one will rest on top of the points and just allow the raker to set up into this. This one actually allows me to slide this along this rail, which is ramped, so I can set the depth of my raker. And usually I want that to be about 12/1000 of an inch lower than the points of the saw. So we can do basically the exact same thing with this. This one even has a file holder, so I can slide a file in here and clamp it down on there so I can joint the teeth with that. So just as before, the first thing we want to do is joint all these. So I can set the file in there and joint all these teeth. And so just like before, we're going to reshape this raker. I want to cut it down a little bit deeper. Then bend it over just a little bit. These ones are smaller, so I have to be a little more careful. Then we can come in with a filing gauge that is made for it. File those into a nice point. Then we can get rid of the flats. And just like that, we got rakers that are ready to go. Now with these points, some people like to still use a triangular file just like they would use on a handsaw and put it at a good flame and go across them. I don't like to do that as much because you're going to end up using the full surface of the file. So I usually grab the mill file just like I did before and do the exact same thing on these and work them down into shape until I get rid of the point on the end. The thing that scares people is when you get in between here, you start running into the tooth beside it. It's not that much of an issue because the material you're hitting down here in the gullet is really not that important. And so just like that, you got another nice shiny tooth. Just keep on going, down to the next one, and down to the next one, and down to the next one, and soon you've got a sharp saw. So now that we've shaped all the rakers and we brought them down to about 12 thousandths of an inch below the points, we brought all of the points up into a nice sharp shape. The next thing we want to do is set them. And in this case, I don't have a spider, which is a little gauge used for testing the set. And so basically, I'm just going to feel them and see that they're leaning out a little bit more. Some people are going to be very, very particular about their set and going to a very specific amount and how it's done. I'm not as particular on that. I'm just making sure that there is a little bit of set. I'm not looking for the perfect saw. And so I don't have a spider that actually checks the set. I just want to feel them and make sure that the tooth is leaning out. Usually I'm going to set a saw once every few sharpenings. Some people will go and set it every single sharpening, but with big teeth like this, I don't find as much use for that. Now, there is a whole camp that says you need to set the teeth before you sharpen it, and there's a whole camp that says, no, you don't set the teeth until after you sharpen it. Everyone's a little bit different. Everyone has something different. I actually like to set it after sharpening, but that's just my personal preference. So for setting the teeth, there's going to be a lot of different ways of doing it. Some people actually have a plate that they can put underneath it. It has a certain amount of bend into it. I just like to set this onto something a little softer like a walnut or even a pine, and then I'll come in with a hammer and I'll just give it 2 little taps on each tip. And I'm just going to be doing the ones that have the bevel up. So right now you have the saw blade like this. The ones that are around this way, I don't want to hit those because I want to bend those the other way. So I'm going to do half of them from this side, just 2 little taps per. And then I'm going to flip the saw over and do the exact same thing, tapping the other ones the other direction. And that's basically all I'm going to do for setting. Some people are really going to be picky and they're going to come back in here and want to make sure that they're all exactly where they need to be. But in all honesty, it doesn't make that big a difference. If you do have a saw that gets binding to the cut, then I might come back and check them, or I might run a sharpening stone over one side to make sure everything's nice and true. But most of the time with a saw like this, it doesn't make that big a difference for your average use. So now we have this all sharpened. The rakers are all cut to be a little bit lower than our points. All of our points come to a nice point. We have a little bit of set in the saw. Let's put some handles back on this, take it out into the field, and have a little bit of fun. Now, this really isn't a grand tutorial about how to do everything perfectly. I'm just wanting to show how to make a functioning saw, how to clean it up so you can get out in the woods and cut something as opposed to it just being dull and taking a lot of time. You can spend a lot more time in this. You can get a lot more tools and get a lot more detail into them. And if you do want to see more information on all of the little nitpicky things that you can do with sharpening them and hardening different teeth and softening the teeth, I'll leave a link to an entire series of videos down below that will clear up a lot more of that information. So usually you just want to pull. Oh, okay. And you let me pull it back. Okay. And you pull it forward. Don't put pressure down until the saw is down. Use as much as this log. So there you go. I've been having a lot of fun with this, and I'm looking forward to years of using this in the field and helping clear out some of the trails around here at some of the parks. It's a great tool to have for that. It doesn't make a lot of noise, and you can have a lot of fun. take a friend out in the woods with two handles and have a good time playing Push Me, Pull You. So that's about it for today. I hope you liked this. If you did, please hit like, comment, and subscribe. Also think about helping out on Patreon or clicking the joining button down below and becoming a member. That really does help out the channel because I don't have any sponsors here. I want what I say to be what I want to say, not what the sponsors want me to say. I think that's about it now, and until next time, have a wonderful day. Interesting facts about these saws. You have a lot of regular teeth up here, but down here at the end you have these teeth that no one ever uses. Those are called wisdom teeth.